Stop. Put your phone down for 1 second, then pick it back up, because the sentence I am about to read you may be the most important thing said inside Kensington Palace in the last 50 years. Prince William has reportedly looked at his advisors and said, in effect, Prince Andrew will no longer be the only example. Harry will be the living proof of what happens when someone tries to sell their own family's pain for profit. Read that again. Harry will be the living proof. Because that is not the language of a brother hoping for reconciliation. That is not the language of a son making peace. That is the language of a future king drawing a line in the sand and saying, on this side, the institution, on that side, everyone who monetizes its trauma. And once the line is drawn, it does not move. Now, if you know the weight of the comparison to Prince Andrew, you already feel your stomach drop. Because Andrew is not a cautionary tale. Andrew is the worst thing that has happened to the Windsor family in modern history. Stripped of his military affiliations, stripped of his royal patronages, banished from the working royal roster. Exiled, in every way except the technical, from the public life of the institution. And William is now telling his inner circle, quietly but unmistakably, that Harry is next in that lineage of cautionary tales. Not because of a scandal imported from outside the family, not because of a lawsuit filed by a stranger, but because of a choice, a deliberate, commercial, calculated choice to turn family pain into product. April 2026 will be etched into the Windsor annals, not for a regal ceremony, not for a gilded procession, not for a royal wedding or a state funeral, but for something far more consequential. The moment the British Monarchy officially ended the era of tolerance. The moment Prince William stopped playing defense and started playing offense. The moment an ancient institution looked at a member of its own bloodline and said, without flinching, you are no longer one of us. Stay with me, because in the next few minutes, I am going to walk you through every single layer of this collapse. The speech in Melbourne that triggered it. The archival footage Harry projected on a screen in front of 5,000 strangers. The 20% affiliate commission hidden in Meghan's hospital visit, the visa crisis in Washington, the protocol of severance already being drafted by palace lawyers, and a detail buried near the end, a document known as the Covenant of Duty that may permanently change who is allowed to call themselves a member of the royal family. This is not a gossip story. This is a constitutional reordering happening in real time, and by the end of this video, you are going to understand it better than 99% of the world's press. Here is the question I want you to carry with you the whole way through. If a man chooses to sell his family's private grief for a paycheck, does the family still owe him anything? Hold on to that. Because the answer when it comes is going to surprise you. Let me set the scene. Because the story does not begin in Kensington Palace. It begins in a convention center in Melbourne, Australia, in front of an audience of 5,000 delegates and millions watching online at an event billed as the International Mental Health Summit. The lights dim, the audience quiets. Prince Harry steps onto a lit stage in a tailored suit. And then, in the next 45 minutes, he performs what palace insiders are now calling a psychological autopsy of his own family. Live, on camera, with commercial sponsors watching. With global news cameras rolling, with every word transcribed, clipped, replayed, and monetized, Harry declared on that stage a need to cleanse himself of what he called a Windsor bloodline poisoned by indifference. Poisoned by indifference. That is the word he chose, poisoned. A word you use when you are describing something rotten, something toxic, something that needs to be removed from the body before it does more damage. And he was using it to describe his own family, his father, his grandfather, his grandmother, centuries of ancestors stretching back to the origins of the crown itself. And then came the line that reportedly made the king's advisors physically wince when the transcript landed on their desks. Harry said, and I want you to hear the weight of this sentence, "My father loved the crown more than he loved his own children." He is not a bad king, but he is a father imprisoned by a system that does not allow a human heart to beat. A father imprisoned by a system that does not allow a human heart to beat. Think about what that sentence does. It strips the crown of its majesty. It reimagines it as a cage. It tells a global audience of millions that the current king of the United Kingdom is not a father in any emotional sense, that he is a prisoner, that his love was diverted by institutional force away from his children and toward a hat, a beautiful hat, an ancient hat, but a hat nonetheless. And the man wearing it, according to his own son, is a hollow version of what a father should be. That is not a personal grievance. That is a public indictment. And it was delivered at a time when King Charles III is managing, by every credible report, a serious ongoing battle with cancer. A man who, at this very moment, is working through his remaining energy reserves to fulfill his constitutional duties while privately confronting his own mortality. Harry chose this moment, this specific vulnerable window, to launch his most cutting public attack on his father's emotional availability. Palace insiders have a word for that kind of timing. They call it predatory. But hold on, because that was only the opening move. What Harry did next is the part that pushed Prince William from tired tolerance into cold, absolute fury. Here is where it gets absolutely insane. Pay very close attention to this next part, because this is the moment the story shifts from a family disagreement into what insiders are openly describing as a betrayal without precedent. Harry used the stage to reopen the single deepest scar in the lives of both brothers, the death of Princess Diana. And he did not just speak about it, he weaponized it. Using modern high-definition imaging technology, he projected on the enormous screen behind him slow-motion archival footage of the most sensitive moments of his and William's childhood. The footage every British citizen of a certain age remembers with physical pain. The image of two young boys, aged 12 and 15, trudging behind their mother's coffin in 1997. Expressions frozen, shoulders straight, eyes forward, being watched, in that moment of unbearable private grief, by 2.5 billion people across the globe. Harry took that footage, he slowed it down, and he projected it frame by frame in front of 5,000 delegates at a commercial summit to illustrate what he called his thesis of children traumatized by the system. Stop for a second, feel the weight of what that actually means. The footage of a 12-year-old boy walking behind his mother's coffin, the single most painful public moment of his entire childhood, was taken by his younger brother, blown up to cinema size, slow to a frame rate that magnified every micro-expression of suppressed grief, and used as a visual prop in a commercial speech. A speech that would be edited into clips that would be shared on social media that would drive traffic that would generate revenue that would flow into the bank accounts of the Sussex enterprise. Let me sit with that image for one more moment, because I want you to really see it the way William reportedly saw it. A screen the size of a cinema wall, a darkened auditorium, 5,000 strangers in silent rows, and on that screen, a slow-motion replay of a child being dragged through the worst day of his life on a global television broadcast. Except now, nearly 3 decades later, the footage is not being used to mourn. It is not being used to honor. It is being used to illustrate a thesis about institutional toxicity. A thesis that will in turn be packaged into a keynote fee, a Netflix episode, a podcast segment, a book proposal, a speaking tour, a brand. The brother in those images never agreed to be in any of that. And 30 years after the day the footage was filmed, he was forced to watch it become a product. Harry did not just use those images to honor his mother. He used them to enlist William as a fellow victim in a narrative William had never authorized. He said on that stage, with calculated softness in his voice, "My brother and I are two pieces of the same shattered soul. The only difference is that I chose freedom, while he is still forced to wear the mask of a future king to hide scars that have never healed." Read that again. The only difference is that I chose freedom, while he is still forced to wear the mask of a future king. That single sentence is not grief. It is character assassination dressed up in therapy language. It implies that William is psychologically fragile, that he is dishonest about his own pain, that the composure he has built, the discipline he has maintained, the duty he has chosen is all a mask, a performance, a lie he tells himself and the world because he is too afraid to do what Harry did and walk away. And then came the question that lit the fuse on everything that followed. Harry posed it directly to the audience. Can a man who cannot face his own trauma like my brother have the psychological health to lead a nation? Can a man like my brother have the psychological health to lead a nation? That is not a grieving sibling. That is a rival who has just publicly suggested that the future king of the United Kingdom is mentally unfit for the throne. And William noticed. The response from Kensington Palace, this time, did not follow the tired, polished recollections may vary path that had defined every previous Sussex controversy. A source close to William put it plainly. The prince felt disgusted to see his most private, most painful moment sold by his own brother for commercial profit in a personal public relations campaign. William does not accept Harry speaking in his name. He never did, and he never will. If you have followed this family for the last half-decade, you know how significant that shift is. Recollections may vary was the single sentence that came to define the late Queen's approach to the Sussex situation. It was a masterpiece of diplomatic minimization. It acknowledged that a disagreement existed, it refused to litigate the details, it left the institution above the mud. It worked brilliantly for years. Under that framing, every Sussex allegation was quietly absorbed, deflected, neutralized. The palace did not fight, the palace did not defend. The palace simply, with a slight tilt of the head, noted that other memories of the same events existed, and the British public, which values dignity above drama, generally sided with the palace. William's statement breaks that doctrine entirely. The statement that followed was short, sharp, brutal. It reflected for the first time publicly the resolve of a man who is about to be king. The difference between a man and a child, the statement said, is how we process pain. One uses it to build responsibility. The other uses it to sell event tickets. Do not use my silence to fill your pockets. Do not use my silence to fill your pockets. That is the sound of the door closing forever. But that is nothing compared to what comes next, because William did not stop at a public statement. He moved from words into policy, from expressions of displeasure into institutional architecture. He activated what palace insiders are now calling the Protocol of Severance. Let me walk you through what that actually means, because this is where the story stops being about a family feud and starts being about the restructuring of the British monarchy itself. The Protocol of Severance has several pillars, and each one is designed to cut a different thread that still ties the Sussex enterprise to the royal institution. Pillar number 1, the commercial cease and desist. Under William's direction, the palace legal team has begun drafting a formal institutional disclaimer to be sent to major global corporations, to streaming giants, to talent agencies, to publishing houses, to jewelry brands, to anyone, anywhere who might be contemplating a deal with the Sussexes based on the commercial value of the Duke and Duchess title. The document, according to insiders, states plainly that the titles of Duke and Duchess of Sussex are dormant for commercial purposes. Dormant. That word is doing enormous work. It does not say revoked. It does not say canceled. It says dormant, meaning the titles exist technically, but the palace considers any commercial use of them a violation of the crown's dignity. And if a corporation chooses to do business with the Sussexes on the basis of those titles, they are on notice that they may face legal resistance from the palace itself. William's reported position is precise, almost surgical. These titles are peerages of the United Kingdom. They are not brands to be licensed for artificial intelligence, fashion apps, or luxury retreats. If the title is being used to sell a product, it is no longer a title. It is a trademark, and the crown owns the copyright to the royal image. That is the language of a man who intends to starve the Sussex brand at the legal level, not by stripping anything, not by making a dramatic public announcement, but by quietly putting every potential partner on warning that doing business with this couple now carries institutional risk. And in the corporate world, institutional risk is the one thing no general counsel wants to hear about. The moment a legal department sees a letter from Buckingham Palace land on the desk of their chief executive, the deal goes cold. Not because the letter is threatening legal action the same afternoon, but because the letter is a marker, a signal, a red flag in a file that will sit there for years. The next time an executive has to approve a multi-million-dollar deal with the Sussexes, the question they will be asked is simple: have we resolved the palace correspondence? If the answer is no, the deal dies in committee, quietly, without drama, without headlines. It simply does not move forward. That is what it looks like when a 1,000-year-old institution decides to starve a modern celebrity brand. It does not engage, it does not debate. It simply puts a letter in front of the right lawyers and allows the rest of the system to do the work. Pillar number 2, the diplomatic erasure. During the Australian tour, much of the Sussexes' perceived authority came from what observers called the pseudo-royal reception they managed to manufacture. Photographs in front of war memorials, wreath-laying ceremonies that looked indistinguishable from official state visits, hospital walkthroughs with the gravity of a working royal engagement. To prevent this from ever happening again, the protocol of severance includes what insiders are calling a zero support directive, issued through the Foreign, Commonwealth, and Development Office to every British embassy and every British High Commission on Earth. The directive is simple. Treat Harry and Meghan as high-profile private citizens. No government-sanctioned security briefings, no diplomatic motorcades, no official liaison with local dignitaries. No red carpet rollout, no military honors, nothing. When the Sussexes land in a foreign country, they land as celebrities, not envoys, not representatives, just two famous people who used to have a different job. Let me explain why this matters in financial terms. Because it does enormously. The commercial value of a Sussex tour has always depended on the illusion that they are still, in some meaningful sense, royal. That they still carry a portion of the institution with them when they travel. That image is what justifies the 7-figure speaker fees. That image is what makes Netflix executives write $100 million checks. That image is what gets premium sponsors in the room. Strip the image, and what remains is a podcast couple with good teeth. That is not worth $100 million. That is worth whatever the open market will pay on a Tuesday afternoon. Pillar number 3, the archival embargo. And this is the pillar that hit Harry the hardest, because it cuts off the raw material for his entire commercial machine. Under William's direction, the Royal Archives have begun implementing a financial and logistical embargo on any future requests for historical data or personal correspondence originating from the Sussex camp. If Harry wants old photographs for a memoir, the answer is no. If he wants transcripts for a Netflix documentary, the answer is no. If he wants private family footage for a podcast episode, the answer is no. The vault is closed, the door is locked, the key has been thrown in the Thames. William's reported logic is savage in its simplicity. If Harry views the institution as a source of psychological toxicity, he should no longer have access to its historical assets to fuel his commercial media ventures. You do not get to declare the family poisonous and then keep raiding the family albums for content. You pick one. And Harry, by deciding to cleanse himself on a stage in Melbourne, has picked. The Prince of Wales is essentially placing a firewall around the family's history, ensuring that no future Netflix documentary, no future memoir, no future podcast can use the Crown's private records to attack the living members of the monarchy. Harry will have to write his next chapter without the one resource that made the previous chapters valuable, and that, in the content economy, is almost impossible. Think about what that means for the commercial model Harry has built. Every book, every interview, every documentary has drawn its authority from one thing and one thing only: access. The implicit promise to the reader, to the viewer, to the platform, that what you are about to hear has not been heard before because the person telling you has been inside the gilded room. Without access, that promise evaporates. A memoir without new revelations is not a memoir, it is a reheated essay. A documentary without new footage is not a documentary, it is a clip reel. A podcast without new stories is not a podcast. It is a therapy session that nobody is paying to attend. William understands this better than any advisor because he has spent his entire adult life on the other side of the same vault, watching how the institution's memory is curated, protected, released. He knows exactly which doors matter, and he has just locked them all. But stay with me, because while all of this is happening in London, something even more dangerous for Harry is quietly gathering momentum in Washington, D.C. Here is the part most people get completely wrong. They think the Windsor Firewall is the worst of Harry's problems. It is not. The worst of Harry's problems is sitting in a file in the United States Department of Homeland Security, and it has been sitting there for years, waiting for the right moment to become a headline. Let me explain. Under United States immigration law, an admission of drug use is often grounds for the denial of a visa, in some cases for deportation. If an applicant is found to have failed to disclose such information truthfully on their application forms, the legal exposure becomes even more serious. And Harry, in his memoir and in subsequent interviews, has made extensive, public, on-the-record admissions about his history with controlled substances, cocaine, cannabis, psychedelic mushrooms, ayahuasca. He discussed these experiences openly, proudly, therapeutically, in a book that sold nearly 5 million copies around the world. A powerful American think tank, the Heritage Foundation, noticed. They filed a legal petition demanding the release of Harry's immigration records. The question at the center of that petition is simple, and it cuts to the bone. Did the Duke of Sussex receive preferential treatment because of his royal status? Did the American government waive him through a process that would have stopped an ordinary applicant dead? This is a legal mechanism that ordinary celebrities do not face. A think tank rarely bothers to pursue immigration records of a private entertainer. They do it here because they smell a constitutional inconsistency. A two-tier system. And in the United States, a country founded on the rejection of inherited privilege, the suggestion that a British prince received an exemption from the rules that apply to every other applicant is not just politically radioactive. It is a reform case waiting to be built. Every news cycle that passes without a response from the federal government turns up the heat, and the heat, if it continues to rise, will eventually force a decision. A decision that could, in the worst scenario, include a reopening of the underlying application itself. By February 2026, that legal pressure had reached a fever pitch, and the timing could not be more catastrophic for Harry. Because as he stands on a stage in Melbourne lecturing a crowd of 5,000 about cleansing his soul, the American public is increasingly asking why a foreign prince is allowed to reside in the United States while seemingly operating under a different set of rules than ordinary citizens. It is the kind of question that, once it enters public discourse, does not go away. It only intensifies, and it eventually demands an answer. Here is the part where William's strategy becomes almost chilling in its precision. Because according to palace sources, William has explicitly refused to allow any royal diplomatic channels to be used to assist Harry in his visa battle. None. Zero. The Prince of Wales has reportedly told his advisors that Harry sought financial independence and a life as a private citizen, and he must therefore face the American legal system as exactly that. Without the shield of the British crown, without quiet back-channel intervention, without a diplomatic phone call from London to the State Department, without anything. Let me explain why that refusal is so devastating. For decades, royal family members have enjoyed a quiet institutional protection in moments of legal complication abroad. A call is made, a courtesy is extended. A problem that would consume a private citizen for years is quietly resolved over a weekend. William has just unilaterally removed that umbrella from over his brother's head. If the American courts decide to compel disclosure, if the evidence shows Harry was not truthful, if political pressure builds toward action, Harry will face it alone, as a private man in a foreign legal system, with no institutional cover. This is the firewall in action, and it is doing exactly what it was designed to do. But hold on, because William is not finished. There is one more pillar to the protocol of severance, and it may be the most historically significant of all. Pillar number 4, the covenant of duty. This is the part almost no mainstream outlet is covering yet, and it may change the shape of the British monarchy for the next 100 years. While removing a prince from the line of succession technically requires an act of parliament, a process the king has reportedly been reluctant to initiate, William is exploring a different mechanism. An internal regulation, a covenant, a binding pledge that would be required of any individual in the top 10 of the line of succession. The pledge would commit the signatory to refrain from engaging in commercial activities that conflict with the crown's historic neutrality. Think about what that actually does. It puts Harry in an impossible position. He either renounces his lucrative American contracts, which would implode the entire Sussex financial model, or he refuses to sign, in which case he is, by the terms of his own refusal, legally and morally unfit to remain at the top of the line of succession. It is a trap with no exit. And William, by floating it to senior advisors, has signaled that he is willing to institutionalize that trap. This is not punishment. This is architecture. William is building a monarchy in which the distinction between a working royal and a private celebrity is absolute, enforced, permanent. A monarchy in which you cannot have one foot in and one foot out. A monarchy in which duty is not a suggestion, it is a requirement. Signed, witnessed, binding. Let me put this into the context of 1,000 years of British royal history, because what William is proposing is, in some ways, unprecedented, and in other ways, it is the most traditional thing imaginable. The monarchy has always quietly required commitments from its inner circle. Loyalty oaths, oaths of allegiance, rules about marriage, rules about religion, rules about residence. For most of the institution's history, those rules were enforced through social pressure and family discipline. You knew what was expected, you did it. And if you did not, you were quietly shown the door. What William is doing now is simply writing down, in formal language, what was once carried by custom. And writing things down in law is what makes them survive generations. And the message that architecture sends to Harry is unmistakable. The era of the half-in, half-out model is over. The door that was propped open at the Sandringham Summit in 2020 is now being welded shut. Not with fanfare, not with public announcements, but with legal documents, with diplomatic directives, with archival embargoes, with covenants of duty. Now let me bring you back to the Australian tour, because this is where the ideological and financial consequences of Harry's strategy collided in public view, and the collision was ugly. Meghan's visit to the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne was, on the surface, a charitable engagement. Photographs of the Duchess hugging sick children, quiet words with parents, donations announced, the usual pattern of a royal-adjacent hospital visit. But within hours of those photographs hitting social media, observers noticed something that changed the entire complexion of the visit. The posts had affiliate marketing links embedded in them, a 20% commission, reportedly, on the shop, the look functionality of her social media feed. Meaning that while Meghan was hugging sick children, her social media accounts were simultaneously generating revenue from viewers clicking through to purchase the clothing she was wearing. A charity visit, monetized, in real time. I want you to really let that settle, because that is not a minor ethical slip. That is not a case of a busy social media manager forgetting to turn off an affiliate link. That is the structural business model of the modern Sussex brand exposing itself in the worst possible context. Every photo opportunity has been engineered as a commercial asset. Every appearance has been quietly tagged, tracked, monetized. The hospital visit was not a break from the business. It was the business. And the visit to the sick children was not a pause in the hustle. It was a premium inventory slot in the hustle. Once the British public saw that, and they did see it, the damage could not be undone, because the line between charity and commerce, once blurred, cannot simply be redrawn by a press release. The perception settles, and the perception, in this case, was that the Duchess of Sussex had weaponized a pediatric cancer ward as a backdrop for e-commerce. For the British establishment, that single detail crystallized the entire problem. Royal service, when it works, is a gift. It is given, not sold. The moment it becomes a revenue stream, it stops being service and becomes something else entirely. William has reportedly told the king that the title of Sussex is being treated by the couple as a promotional logo rather than an instrument of service. And once a title becomes a logo, the institution has only two choices: accept the degradation or end the arrangement. William chose option 2. The Australian public, known for what they themselves call tall poppy syndrome and a deep disdain for pretension, began to see through the psychobabble of Harry's speech and the opportunistic timing of their tour. The tickets for Meghan's $3,000 women's retreat in Sydney did not move. News outlets in Sydney and Melbourne started openly using the ATM analogy, accusing the couple of treating Australia as a lucrative outpost for their American financial interests. The warm reception the Sussexes had expected turned cold, fast, and the images of empty seats, once an isolated embarrassment in Melbourne, became a pattern across the tour. Meanwhile, back in London, something quiet and powerful was happening. William, without saying a word about his brother, was elevating the working royals in the eyes of the British public. By highlighting the quiet resilience of the Princess of Wales during her cancer recovery, by underscoring the king's steadfast commitment to his constitutional role despite his own health battles, by himself carrying more of the public engagement schedule than ever before. The contrast with Harry's commercial tour was stark, and it did not need a single word of direct commentary from William to land. The British public noticed, and the British public, for all its reputation for scandal hunger, has a deep and ancient respect for stoic duty in times of crisis. They rallied around the quiet crown model. They rewarded restraint, they punished indulgence. Polls across April showed William's favorability rising, Harry's falling, and the gap widening week by week. William has proven something important with this strategy. He has proven that the most effective response to a psychological coup is not a rebuttal. It is an absolute and dignified indifference. You do not argue with someone who is selling you. You simply stop giving them anything to sell. And over time, the product runs out. The buyers lose interest. The story becomes repetitive. The algorithm moves on. And the attacker, deprived of oxygen, collapses on their own. That is the strategy, and it is working. The legacy of April 2026 will be recorded, I suspect, as the moment Prince William truly became the guardian of the throne. He has successfully navigated the most dangerous internal threat to the monarchy since the abdication crisis of 1936. By implementing a policy of institutional isolation, he has protected the final chapter of his father's reign from the debris of a commercial rebellion. He has secured his own eventual succession from the toxic narrative being sold out of Montecito. And he has, in the process, redefined what it means to be a working member of the House of Windsor in the 21st century. Think about the historical weight of that comparison for a moment. The abdication crisis of 1936 nearly ended the monarchy. A king walked away from the throne for love, and the institution spent decades repairing the damage to public confidence. What William has done in April 2026 is arguably more surgical, more controlled, and more forward-looking. He has not waited for a scandal to erupt. He has not allowed the institution to be blindsided. He has diagnosed the threat, modeled its trajectory, and built a firewall designed to contain it before it could metastasize further. That is not reactive leadership, that is strategic leadership. And strategic leadership in a monarchy is what separates the sovereigns who survive from the sovereigns who are overwritten by history. The Windsor Firewall is complete. The House of Windsor has survived the cleansing, not by changing its nature to suit a celebrity culture, not by apologizing for its existence, not by submitting to the therapy industrial complex, but by reinforcing the ancient boundaries that make it unique, by insisting, quietly and relentlessly, that the crown is not for sale, that the title is not a trademark, and that duty is not a choice. As Harry and Meghan find themselves on the outside looking in, the message from Kensington Palace is final. You chose this. You chose to cleanse. You chose to monetize. You chose to turn your brother's childhood grief into a commercial slideshow. And the institution, after years of patience, has simply chosen to believe you, to take you at your word, to treat you, going forward, exactly the way you said you wanted to be treated, as private citizens, as celebrities, as people who no longer belong to the family you publicly cleansed yourself of. The royal civil war has ended, not with a shout, not with a ceremony, not with a final confrontation, but with a quiet, lethal victory for the institution. And the Sussexes, for the first time in their adult lives, have been left to inhabit a celebrity void entirely of their own making. Now, let me bring you back to the question I asked at the very beginning. If a man chooses to sell his family's private grief for a paycheck, does the family still owe him anything? You have now heard the answer as it has played out in real time. The family, in the end, owes him what he asked for: freedom, independence, distance, separation. A life on his own terms, unshielded by the institution he disavowed. He asked for it over and over again in interviews and memoirs and speeches and documentaries. And April 2026 is the month the family finally decided to grant the request in full, without exception, without revision, without the quiet institutional safety net that had always been silently extended even to those who claim to reject it. Be careful what you ask for, because the British monarchy, it turns out, is finally listening. There's a line I want to leave you with because I think it captures everything about this moment in a way the tabloid headlines never will. The institution that Harry spent 5 years attacking as cold, indifferent, and emotionally unavailable is the same institution that, for 5 years, quietly protected him, paid for his security, covered his mistakes, left the door open for him to walk back through. That is what actually happened behind the scenes. The indifference he accused the family of was, in practice, a form of patient grace. The coldness was distance maintained to give him room to return, and the refusal to fight back in the press was not weakness, it was discipline. April 2026 is the month that discipline ran out, not because the institution turned cruel, but because the person on the other side of the door stopped knocking and started picking the lock. And when you pick the lock on your own family home to steal the photographs off the walls and sell them to strangers, eventually the family changes the locks. That is what has now happened. So now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, did Prince William do the right thing? Was the protocol of severance necessary, or is it an overreach? Is Harry a victim of an institution that refuses to evolve, or the author of his own exile? Should King Charles intervene and try to pull his son back, or allow the consequences of the Melbourne speech to fully play out? I read every single comment, and I want to know where you stand on this. If this breakdown gave you something to think about, do me 2 quick favors. Hit that like button, because it genuinely determines whether this channel survives another month in the algorithm. Hit subscribe because the next chapter of this story, the one about the covenant of duty and what happens when Harry actually receives it in the post, is already in the works. And then click the next video waiting for you on your screen. Because I promise you, after everything you just heard, what comes next is going to reshape the way you see this entire family forever. Stay with me. The royal civil war is over, but the reckoning is only just beginning.